Make it happen.
Hello everyone, so welcome back. So we have a bunch of red items. We dropped some stuff last minute, so I think the one that we would be this one here. But I don't think do we have anybody here that can talk to this? If not.
Yeah, I'm here. Sorry.
Okay.
So this is, we approved all these new APIs that are targeted for the pinvoke source generation. And this is a proposal to move them to a different namespace, which we had kind of started discussing last time we came with one of these APIs. Our current proposal, which we're largely looking for feedback on, is putting it in system runtime marshalling instead of system runtime interop services. The proposal as we have it says to move everything, but right now I'm actually kind of thinking we don't want to put the triggering attribute, the library import attribute, and the string marshalling, and just move the ones that are very targeted for marshalling. I think that's largely what we're kind of hoping to get feedback about.
Why would you leave library import and string marshalling
So
where they are?
It's not technically about marshalling, right? Because so all those other ones are very much like, this is how you can do more advanced marshalling scenarios and custom marshalling. Whereas the library import is, a lot of that can be just, I care about defining this pinvoke and you can do whatever marshalling you want. It's more targeted at I wanted to define a pinvoke.
Fair enough. Also makes converting DLL import to library import easier because you don't need to change any namespace imports.
So this is a brand new namespace, right? This doesn't exist today?
Yes. This would be a brand new namespace. Yeah, I guess that was the other thing of whether we want just marshalling under interop services or to get rid of or have a new one.
Just look. We only have system runtime. We have quite a bit of stuff under that already. It's down to a I mean, it feels kind of interop here, right? So, and given that there already are subnamespaces of interop services, it wouldn't be terrible to put it under interop services.
The one contrary view that I would give to that is it looks like there were some NetFX only marshaller types in system runtime interop services custom marshallers.
Yeah.
And that maybe we don't want to be right next to that namespace. So
part of it was making a cleaner break from past things.
I mean, custom marshallers doesn't exist in core though. The .NET framework only. Would never see it in core.
I guess that's true. I don't know how. I can't help but call it MSDN still. I don't know if the view would hide that namespace. Like if you would ever see both at the same time. Certainly APIs of .NET would show both, but
I don't think the docs do. I mean, if you are in the filtered view, which I think you would be by default. Yeah, as far as I can tell, if you go to this here, it doesn't seem like easier. If you scroll down here, this is basically the .NET API browser filtered for .NET. These are the only things that show up. So it basically filters down to the ones that are available.
Yeah, so then being under interop services seems fair to me then.
The other thing that we thought might be weird is that we do have a Marshall class not under the interop services namespace. I don't know if that gets confusing. There's already a thing, and then there's a different namespace that is marshalling.
I mean, that is a problem, but I think as long as you include the term marshalling in the namespace, I think that problem will exist, no matter whether you put it under. And that's just the logical organizational conceptual problem, having types with marshalling.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you invoke IntelliSense and literally type system.runtime.interrupt dot, then you would see marshal and marshalling showing up in IntelliSense. But that might or might not be a good, thing depending on. But if you just type using system dot, then it will only show namespaces in the context. Literally type out the using statement.
And having interop services dot marshal and then a sub namespace of marshalling, like there's a pattern at least described in framework design guidelines for that but the having the friendly, not that anyone would call Marshall friendly, type in a parent namespace of the complicated things. So
okay.
I think I'm convinced system runtime interop services marshalling is the best name, but there's not a lot of caring behind that.
Well, then this is it, right?
And I think we wanted to only not move library import attribute and string marshalling. Basically, the triggering things.
I see. I just copied what
The
was
first
actually
two.
in the API proposal.
Yeah, so we had further discussion about.
So you would prefer the library import separate?
Yeah, so the first two, because library import also has string marshalling as a property on it, or as a field.
Gotcha. So they would go into interop services then?
Yeah, so that basically it stays where it is. Yeah.
Right. That's it.
Thank you.
So I think Jeremy is here, right? When I looked at it, I the link somewhere in here. I condensed it down a little bit so it's easier to read.
Okay. So just exposing the functionality to Windows functionality is better. How the enhanced drag experience, like providing images. You can see the there's some videos up at the top just showing so there's that's a before, so you can look at that to see what happens now, and then it's the enhanced support. So you basically will look like regular Windows things, like you're dragging, you get icons there, and internally, because you're generating it within WinForms, you don't get any. Down at the bottom, you can see you're able to provide the previews and everything. So much nicer experience.
Right. And so API was
It only
what this means is we just have to have some overloads that allow us to pass in custom
the
state.
extra data that's So there's a new enum, and then some properties on the arguments, and a new overload for the constructor, and then the initiation of drag drop happens in two different places. One is in control, and you can see that a little further down, and it's just adding the overload to do drag drop. Let's scroll further down, you'll see that. That's the control and tool strip item. So
It's funny, this guy is not derived from.
yeah, there are some odd things there.
But so basically, I think in the past there was no way to control the icon, right? It was completely derived from the drop. We're introducing this icon type now that has the previous stuff on it. And then how do you express custom, basically? Because you also have an actual icon somewhere here.
It's in the do drag drop. I mean, the args you don't generate; those are given to you. So when you kick off a do drag drop of your own,
I guess my question
then
is,
you would be passing.
If I pass in an actual image, what is the drop? Is there be a custom item here?
No, that's just like if there's an image associated with it, we'll show it. It's just the way it works.
I see. So like
or you have the ability to show it. So you have the give feedback thing, which is what's happening when you're actually dragging, right? So now if you look down there, I think give feedback actually has it, if I remember correctly. Yeah, so there's the drag image there on that.
Oh, I see. So I guess this one here is just the overlay on top of it. It's not actually
yeah,
I see. So this is basically you have an image, and then there is one, we draw it, and then the drop icon type is just a little overlay that tells you what will happen if you do this. Is it a copy or is it a link? Okay.
Yep.
So it's like completely independent of the actual drawing.
Yeah.
Of the drag. Yeah, I mean, makes sense. I mean, it matches the existing overloads. You just add new things at the end.
It seems potentially confusing that the 0 value is not default in the enum. Like there's a thing called default and a thing called none.
Yeah, I guess
it's aligning with the Windows terminology there. So yes, like they are awkward, and they need good comments on it to explain the difference between them.
Right. It's just so I wonder, is the cost of converting it so expensive that it's worth saying that default of drop icon type is not equal to drop icon type.default? Like I feel like if we have a thing called, especially if it's just called default, that it should be 0. Maybe we can say system default behavior, and then that's big and wordy, and maybe somebody wants to use it as a defaulted argument, but it just feels weird to me that we would have a thing called default and its value is not 0.
But so, well, reversing none and default, like none -1.
Yeah, and then translate them in and out of Windows.
Well, it's because yeah, well.
Can we call it Windows default instead of just default?
What's that?
And we call it Windows default instead of just default because it's Windows specific things, right?
This is for WinForms, which is Windows specific.
Right.
I mean, you could. I'm not sure how much is it helping though, because I mean,
You
of
could
course
say
it's still
default
Windows
icon here.
default, but
There's the weirdness is that there's no icon, which is none. Maybe that's default behavior and no icon.
Yeah, what's the difference between none and no drop icon? I guess I'm just seeing these words and they seem the same. If there's a visual element difference, then but it's can somebody reason about them?
Sorry, I have to go and look to see here.
I think no drop might mean it's an icon that indicates you can't drop.
I believe that's right, but bring up my
I mean, the only thing I would suggest is remove the word icon because it's a drop icon type. So
that makes some sense. Would
that then be drop disabled? Would be your icon?
I have mixed feelings, specifically from the wording is always awkward with some of these things, particularly when you're talking about, OLE. And on one hand, it can help people some when they're seeing existing things to be able to map, because the terminology is aligning closer with what Windows calls it.
yeah, if Windows refers to it as no drop, I'd rather call it no drop. The only thing I would change is basically because drop icon type no drop seems like
and I'm fine with that. That makes sense. But like when we shift the terminology around, it's a little weird.
That's. I mean, I'm just, and I guess the answer is somebody would figure it out by testing their application. Ha ha ha. But between default none and no icon, I mean, if it just says no drop, then maybe that'll read easier. It's just between those three, the values and the naming is just like, can somebody walk up to this API and figure out how to use it? Because I think we like to design things for people who are not looking at docs that are just, what do they see in IntelliSense?
Yeah.
And
well, you'll get the summary in IntelliSense, which will help. So, but
you'll still have the problem of if somebody goes and sets this property, like drop icon, and they can write drop icon equal default. That's actually not the default. Because you don't have to say even default of drop icon. You can write drop icon equal little lowercase d default, and that now means no drop icon. That's what, like, if we rename default to system default or something, and then it's like, well, you said default, not system default, and the default is no icon for some reason, then
and I'm fine with that.
Yeah,
I see your point, like the collision with what default means in C#. So we can call it system default. That makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, I'd also be happy if we made system default be the 0 value, but I won't push as hard as having a thing called default not be the default.
Yeah. I mean, it really comes down to like what you want the behavior to be. If you have a field, would you prefer it to be default or not? Like, it makes sense to me to say we would prefer that to be. You want to just map the enum to whatever the underlying Win32 APIs, except that, that makes sense for WinForms because that's how most of the other enums in Windows decided, 20 years ago. I agree with Jeremy. It's just unfortunate that default of drop icon type is different from drop icon type. Either we name it or change the. I can go either way. Just put it in the notes.
I prefer the rename on this in this case.
Yeah.
Just because we as you've already pointed out, we are generally keeping the things mapped directly.
Yeah, it certainly helps.
And that does help when people are trying to do the map between things to make it clear that the things are a direct one-to-one relationship when they're looking at a actual backing Windows docs. It's not something we invented, basically. The extra hidden behavior, right? It's not a Windows thing, but a WinForms thing.
WinForms is not annotated, is it?
Partially.
So in the event arcs, are these things nullable or are they non-nullable? Seems to me that they should probably be nullable, right? Because if you use the first constructor, I would expect those.
Yes, that's probably a better choice, rather than have them be empty.
Because the user will probably never read them. Like, because I mean, in the second one, you already annotated bitmap as nullable, for example. So, kind of assume.
This is just FYI. This has been a community contribution.
Yeah, I saw.
Okay,
The great contribution.
The other question here is about the name give feedback. Is this also standard name for Windows or we just picking up our name here?
That's Windows. The naming in 1991 really wasn't the best in the Windows APIs.
Yeah, give feedback event args. This looks weird to me.
It takes a little bit of mind warping to fully understand what they're actually doing, which are how OLE actually works for drag and drop.
Oh yeah,
The terminology is very confusing. Like who responds to what and how you get the stuff and etc.
Is it going to be confusing that copy, move, and link are the same values as those from drag drop effects and therefore are bit flag values rather than sequential enumeration values?
That's how they're defined in Windows. We can. I don't think you'd see that.
Which Win32 enum is this one mapping to?
I had to guess WM underscore drop underscore icon underscore something. Or it is something OLE underscore something something something.
Looking back at do drag drop. This do drag drop happens to be the actual function for OLE that kicks all this off.
Yeah, I believe. And it takes a ginormous struct probably.
It's all COM stuff. I mean, COM was invented for this to begin with.
It was
So going
And
back
etc.
to give feedback, I mean, like, can we call it like drag drop feedback event args instead?
These are existing ones.
Oh, okay.
We're just adding the extra data onto it.
Oh, I didn't notice that. Yeah, thank you.
I think the proposal is just missing the partial that the other types had on there.
So, I mean, this stuff is also clipboard works around the same sets of format, etc. thing. It's just sticking additional data into the data object per standard. Oh, trying to find his proposal. I mean, his implementation where he's done this. Yeah, so it's drop description and drop image type. These are the other data things that are there. So drop image type is where that one is coming from. The one with the invalid. Actually, they call it
no image.
They call it drop image invalid for -1.
Yeah. Invalid, none, copy, move, link, label, warning, and no image.
Yeah.
Rather than no drop icon.
Yeah, I'd rather go clearer with that. I mean, aligned with it. So invalid would make you happier, right, Jeremy, for -1?
Yeah.
And so can we go back up to that? So we'll just match the ones exactly. It's invalid, none, copy, move, link, label, warning, and no image.
What is the difference between no image and none, though? Let's see.
Use no drop image. The none is the no smoking sign, as they call it.
Yeah. So display an image, but it's a not allowed, basically, versus
Yes.
Does not display any image and only available on Win 7 and later.
No drop allowed. So it's invalid, none, copy, move, link, label, warning, and no image. Would no be okay?
I mean,
Instead of none for the other one? No image is no image. Or we can say no icon.
It's just don't draw something. Makes sense.
yeah.
Yeah, because you're going to
go back up to it again. It says drop icon type, and like maybe the right thing there is just because the thing is drop image underscore. Would it make it clearer if this is? It's not really icon. It's your drop. It's your drop image. But I guess.
So the only thing we've renamed is default to invalid, and then no image to. Sorry, no drop to no image, right?
Yes. Which is more appropriate. None is really no drop.
You're probably not going to end up with a good name there either way, because there'll be people who are looking for the Win32 name, and they'll end up getting none and no image, no matter how you name them mixed up.
And then specifying invalid means the system does what it wants.
Use the default, yeah. That you don't have a preference.
Yeah. It's not invalid, it's use the default image, whatever that is. Mark, if you're talking, we can't hear you.
Looks like that's intentional by how he's looking around.
Weird. So were you also suggesting to rename the enum from drop icon to drop image? Like drop image type seems fine, as well as drop icon type. I don't have a strong preference between those.
So sorry, you're proposing to
I'm-
rename it from what?
I thought I heard a proposal to rename drop icon type to drop image type. I'm clarifying if I heard correctly.
Well, because the drag image thing is separate, like having two things called image is awkward, although but you're basically have two sets of, there's a flag that tells like Windows what sort of overlay to do on it, right? And the image is just another thing you can grab if you want to like display it on your feedback. If it happens to be there, right? So maybe it's fine, and like leave it as drop icon type. People would think of that as an icon, I guess.
I'm still confused. Like, where are we now? So we basically say the no image is no image. That would be drop icon type dot no image. What did I miss here?
That sounds like what I heard.
I mean, I don't
So
think
what's
it's
the-
super odd, but I mean, I'm still confused.
So
what it
I'm fine with
means.
changing it to drop image. I mean, nothing we can do here is going to be perfect because of trying to like find the balance between things. So drop image is, because we're aligning with the other things, changing it from.
I see. You would so you're suggesting to rename it from no image to no drop image.
No, I'm suggesting to change the enumeration to match. So the enumeration is actually drop image type.
Oh, I see now. Okay.
So we'll just map directly with the Windows thing because we're mapping the other stuff. It only makes sense.
Yeah, I don't have a strong preference. I mean, I would just say if you go down that path, then you would have to rename everything that's related to that, of course, from drop icon to drop image.
To drop image.
Yeah.
And they are different, right? Because the drop image is related to whether it can be what the behavior is on drop.
Yeah.
The drag image is like the preview.
Yeah, either one works for me. I mean, that's up to you. I don't have. I mean, the way WinForms uses icons is so interchangeable with image. I mean, normally I would think of icons as something smaller, but given that icons are now 512 pixels or something, it's like I don't know what small means anymore.
So I guess we can keep it drop icon type, but then we would change it from no image to no icon. Like I would rather just keep them aligned one way or the other. Either we use icon consistently through the enum or we use image.
Yeah, I have to say, like, if just seeing none and no icon, I don't know what the difference between those would be. But that might be a problem with the underlying Windows terminology. So
yeah, it is.
For the drop icon type member in the event args, Is drop icon the right name, or should it also be type or drop icon type or icon type? For the property in the event args. Because it looks like this.
I'll take whatever guidance.
It looks like it most closely matches drop description, the struct in Win32. The 3 members there, but it just calls that type. But that doesn't necessarily give enough context from within an event args, like it would from within the struct that Win32 exposes.
I have no opinion on how drop icon the property should be named.
So Tanner, you propose to call it drop icon type, just the same as the type name?
Yeah, or icon type, or one of them. It's just drop icon. My first thought just reading that name would be that it's not an enumeration, but rather it's more like drag images, where it's a bitmap type or an icon type, rather than
I'll agree with that.
Enumeration. So I think just adding that extra type on the end, or whatever, will help clarify this is an enumeration value, not a.
Yeah, I can.
Not an actual image. Yeah. So icon type works for me.
I mean, it is consistent with the rest of WinForms. We very often did that.
So yeah, I think I like icon type.
I mean,
and you can tell what.
I mean, I would probably go with the drop icon type, not because I mean it's on drag event args. It seems a bit weird to have something called icon type on it, because then is it the drag icon or is it the drop icon?
Fair enough. I like the type thing. That's the key thing.
Yeah.
That it says type. Drop icon type works.
And then the only other question I have is on your event arcs for give feedback here, you accept a nullable bitmap, but then on all the do drag drop, you don't. Is that intentional?
Because that's the overload where you're giving the additional.
Sure, but isn't that the same here? Logically, you have an overload that doesn't take it, and you have an overload that does take it.
Oh. Cursor offset. Yes.
I mean, does it make sense to pass in null here and then values for those? I mean, I don't have a preference whether you accept.
I don't think so. I think it should match the other one, and it's just a matter of whether or not you have one applied. So those 3 go together.
Yeah, in that case, I would probably just remove the question mark here and align it there.
Okay. As a question, use default drag image. Is that going to use drag image type dot invalid or dot none? Is that saying the system default or the enum default?
Sorry.
I was typing notes. Can you repeat the question?
So the constructors for these event args and then the control and tool strip item, they all have a parameter use default drag image. I was asking, does that equate to the previous default value, which is now named invalid, which is the system default value? Or does that equate to none, which is the C# default value, which is display the no smoking sign, you know, the circle with the slash through it. Because those are two different things, and I imagine users could interpret default to be kind of either way.
I mean, in the context of a Boolean where you say use default, I would assume it would mean Windows's interpretation of default, not, you know, the type system's understanding of what the default value for an enum would be. Because
So
there's
you'd
no
think
other type
that
in, because I mean, you don't pass in anything here, but you just pass in a bool.
So you'd equate that to drop icon type invalid,
well, I would,
which is the Windows system default.
yes,
Which is not
yes.
invalid, but rather whatever the image, whatever the system says is the default. Names are hard.
Yes. That's how I would interpret that. I mean, it's kind of the same as use default cursors, right? Whatever that translates to, right? Which is the existing one.
Yes, Jeremy, a question for you. Just looking through. Sorry,
go ahead. Finish.
I was just going to say, looking through some of the COM interfaces, we're adding the string message parameter onto the event args. There's a separate COM interface, iDrag source helper 2, which allows you to set or unset a flag called DSH allow description text, which controls whether or not that text is allowed to be visible with the drag drop icon. Is that something that should be covered here, or should it be separate?
I think separate, but I think that this is now that there are comments up at the top. I think the bitmap, the drag image is always intended to be nullable because that's the awkward piece. Use default drag image. It's a layered window drag image with a size of 96 by 96. I'm sorry, it's not clear. I should probably go and look that up to be more clear on the use default drag image. The layered window drag image is used. It just doesn't say enough in the proposal to explain that. But it's not clear to me whether that means that that's like put an image in there, but you generate it. Or that has something to do with what it does for. Oh no, yeah, that's just too weird. I have to look into that. I'm sorry.
No need to be sorry.
Because that I don't want to just like guess on that particular one.
Yeah, I'm fine with just marking it.
So I think that might be. I think it's like either or, right? You either provide a drag image or you use a default drag image,
right?
But I'm not 100% sure, so I have to look into that. But I think the other points are definitely good, and I can try to address that part of it, and then we can bring it back up again to look at that aspect of it to make sure that that's clear. Like it might, if they're truly like orthogonal to each other, or sorry, the inverse of each other, then they would call for having different different overloads in the constructor, right? It seemed weird to like. Then what do you? I mean, what do you do if they're both specified? I guess we could throw in that case or something, but we should know. If you can't, specifying both of them at the same time doesn't make any sense. Like saying set true and then giving another one at the same time, then we need to like understand that.
I mean, you're not passing in the type at all, right? When you initiate the do drag drop, the only thing you say is default image true false, and then I suppose you get the event arcs, right? And that's where you get to do more stuff, right?
You get that as part of the icon thing comes from the query that happens. So drag event arbs is used for a couple of different events, and you respond to it in your control, assuming that you are allowed as a target.
Right.
So you have to set a flag on your control to say that you want to interact with drag drop when you construct it, and then you get an event, and then you're responding back to it with that flag on the drag event args.
Yeah, so basically what I said was, like, I would assume when somebody calls do drag drop and passes in, you know, true for use default drag image, then the event arcs that I'm receiving has a drag drop image type, or icon type rather, set to invalid. And then I get to update that property to say something else, right? That would be my expectation. If it's set to not true, like, I don't know what you get at that point. Probably none.
Don't know. I have to look.
But I mean, my point is more like there is no inconsistency, right? Because you never get to specify both, right? So it's just whatever the translation ends up being. And honestly, I don't actually care what the semantics are, because it's more like what Windows does, right?
Sure. There might be a clearer name and stuff for this.
Yeah.
I guess we can take it as it is, and I can look into it further and bring it back up again if I think that it's just not describable in the comments.
Two questions.
Sure.
We have the bool there, use default drag image, but the enum is icon. But on top of that, do we have any concerns that icon is potentially going to conflict with any future Windows API changes? Like, theoretically, they decide to actually expose some icon support in the future that's different from their drop image type support.
It's possible. I don't think it's probable.
Okay.
I think it's a highly unlikely.
Yeah, I mean, Win32 is more or less done, right?
Well, they add new APIs every single version.
Sure,
yeah,
but
like, they're yeah. I would not expect it. I mean, it's possible anything can happen.
So we should probably rename the parameter, though, right? I think we should call it use default drag icon, probably, right? Because we don't have drag image anymore, right? We went with, yeah, I guess it's also, we call it drop icon type, not drag icon type, right? So
yeah, it's a little bit inconsistent, and
well, it might actually be a different thing, right? Isn't the drag image? Yeah,
well,
that's the thing.
Drag image is different than drop image.
Yeah, so I guess that's the key thing, right? So the drag image is the thing that is actually rendered, and then the drop icon is the overlay on top of that, right? The little adornment in the bottom right corner, right? That basically indicates what you can do.
Yep.
So in that sense, the default drag image has nothing to do with the drop icon type. It's more related to the bitmap, right? So I guess the question is what happens when you specify a drag image bitmap and then you say use default drag image. I guess that means ignore the bitmap.
Look,
or it's only valid when it's null. I mean, either way, I mean, it's unrelated.
my suspicion is that there's probably a better way to describe it.
Yeah.
And like, and I'm fine with the drop icon thing to change it to match the Windows thing specifically to address the concern that Tanner is bringing up about like Windows actually introducing something called icon on these. Because the actual EDOM is drop image type, so it would be no image is the last one and drop image type. So, not.
Yeah, I don't have a strong preference. It's just, it seems being consistent, especially since WinForms is essentially a thin layer over Win32.
Yep.
Is goodness to me.
Yeah.
Or
So
goodingness.
I'm definitely leaning your way, Tanner. I was wishy-washy about it, and I was suggesting that we do it, but I think, yeah, actually, probably it's best to just keep it all in line. So just call it drop image type. And either way, you need some sort of descriptive text to like make it clear. I mean, the summary should tell you what it actually is. You could guess on either one and not be right, right? I mean, we'd have to come up with like, well, no, this is actually drop image overlay, right, or something like that, and then we're really starting to get really far from the Windows definition, and then people see the. I mean, part of the thing is this has never been there, right? For WinForms, so people are going to see this stuff. There's much more likely that they're going to see actual Win32 descriptions of how to do this, and they'll be confused about trying to map the terminology back and forth to what's been now exposed in the Win. There'll be a whole nother set of like paragraphs that people are going to have to write in on Stack Overflow to explain what the mapping is of concepts.
And then if you ever have to do custom rendering or Win32 calls yourself, then you have to do additional mapping between the two, not just like basically casing and underscore removal.
Yep. So.
All right. So then.
So.
Let me hit comment here. Like, I'm honestly of the opinion we can improve it as is, because I haven't heard anything that would require you to come back. We made all the changes already.
So, and I agree with that too. And I can always I will re-review it again just to make, because that last part of it makes me a little uncomfortable. And if I have a problem with it, I can always bring it back for clarification on any other point that I find.
Yeah.
And if it's a small clarification, we sometimes can do that over email.
Yeah. Don't overpromise, Tanner.
I'll review the email and sign off. Immo might not.
That's so bad with this. I guess it's approved and this, right? All right.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. That took longer than I thought.
Yeah. Well, me too.
Is this a quick one, or should we move this to Thursday?
Should be a quick one. I'm here. But if you want to do it next time, that's fine as well.
Oh, you sounded very different from Steven. I'm like, Steven, are you sick?
Okay. I'm the new Steven. No, just kidding. Oh. Do we want to go through it? Or,
yeah, if it's quick, sure. We can go a few minutes over.
Cool. Should be a quick one. So this one, for whoever was present in the meeting earlier today, I actually demoed a prototype for this. It's basically just introducing a new code analyzer, Russell analyzer, which will ship as part of the current Regex source generator. So in the same assembly, basically, which is all, of course, already an analyzer. And so the idea would be to to flag uses as informational whenever a specific invocation. So wherever people are creating Regex instances or using new Regex instances, to suggest using the source generator instead if it's possible. So there are basically two different ways of creating a Regex. One is, of course, through the constructors, and the other is through the static methods. So this would basically search for both. It's an iOperation analyzer that will look for invocations to the Regex constructor and invocations to any of the static methods. and flag them as long as, so the only constraint that we have in the source generator, well, actually there's several. One is you have to be using C#10 or later. So if your project is not using that, then we won't flag. You can't be using regex options non-backtracking because we don't support that yet in the source generator. And the other one is all of your parameters have to be constant or known at compile time. So you can't use a parameter as a pattern because, of course, the source generator can't emit stuff at runtime, of course. So as long as those three things are valid, then this new analyzer would just flag the use and an informational and provide a code fix in order to onboard to the source generator. Yeah, and it will help, of course, with performance. It will help with the lack of today. Unfortunately, the regex source generator, the way that you onboard, is not super visible or trivial. So this would help with that. And as far as I know, and I'm pretty confident with this, there are no cases where you could be using the regex source generator, but you don't want to. You prefer to use the interpreted engine because the regex source generator is always like the engine that it emits. It's always faster than the interpreted one, and it doesn't have like any startup costs or anything. So that's pretty much it. This is the first analyzer that I proposed. So I don't know if there's any information that I missed in here.
So what's not clear to me is what happens if the pattern or the regex options are non-constant but just local variables.
Yeah, so in that case, we wouldn't flag.
You wouldn't?
We wouldn't. Yeah, so the diagnostic would not flag and would not suggest the source generator.
Because I think a very common pattern is basically something like this, where the only difference is that it removes const.
Right.
The reason being that people are just like, oh, I don't want like all my, super long regex and like the, all the piping that I do for regex options on one ginormous line. So they're just extracted into local variables, which they never assigned to. So they could be const, but they never did it. So I would, like if you don't flag those, then it seems kind of like you might miss out on a lot of usages.
I believe, because I think that Stephen, and he's not on the call, but I think you run the numbers, and I think more than 50% of the time, the pattern is an inline literal that gets passed in. So it's not super common for people. Well, I mean, it's common, but it's not the most common case to have a variable that defines the pattern and then that get passed into the constructor. However, it does happen. And so in here, this analyzer would be diable. So for now, we're proposing to just strictly look at either flagging when you have a passed in literal or when your actual variable that you're using is a constant. So if it's not like explicitly a constant, if it's just a variable, for now we wouldn't flag. We could potentially discuss and add that in the future and say, hey, now we're also going to detect cases where, yes, you're using a regular variable, but it doesn't look like you're changing it anywhere. So using the code flow analysis, we can see that it's not going to get changed. So it's effectively constant. So we can go ahead and suggest the source generator for that as well. So that is diable.
Yeah, I mean, I think I know why you're proposing it, because it's tremendously cheaper for the analyzer to not do that. But
exactly,
I'm just saying, in my experience, this is the problem with a lot of the things that I see, is that like people like extracting parameters to locals just for readability, right? And very often they don't use const even if they could.
I think in regex, the reason why they don't do that as often, or at least not in .NET 7 or .NET 6, is because of that new feature, the language feature that VS has, where it has syntax highlighting on the pattern.
I know that, but like the cool thing is you can put a comment on it that says lang equals regex, and then it does it too.
I don't know how many people use that, know. But yeah, I do, but I don't know how many.
No, I think, as I said, like to me, it's literally just the readability, right? And
so the reason is, as you called out, it's performance.
Yeah.
And the reason is this is one of the source generators that ship in box and that is on by default for every single app. And so it's already very performant in the sense that it will basically only analyze the things that it needs to. But if it also has to do all of this code flow analysis, it can affect perf a little bit. So
It can.
that's why for now we're only proposing to flag certain cases, not do the full analysis. Yeah.
How do we keep an eye on that in terms of, I mean, like what Steven said, I take that on face value, but like how do we learn? Because I mean, we don't have telemetry, right? And we basically use our own code base as an indicator, but I'm not sure that our code patterns are necessarily representative of what customers do, right?
We have an ongoing thread right now in order to investigate how we can better measure, and we're in contact with like the perf folks and the perf lab to try to see how do we measure all of the source generators that we're building. So not just analyzers, but source generators. How do we measure their performance and their impact in design time builds and in the load times and whatnot? And what metrics should we have in order to be able to like how do we test? How do we perf test this?
I guess my question was less that, it's more like false negatives, right? False positives customers will complain about, right? False negatives is something that we probably don't know about, right?
Oh, I see what you mean.
Yep. I mean, I don't think that skipping the could have been const is it's a killer here, and certainly if somebody sees it trigger, once ever, they may then wonder why it didn't trigger in other places, and maybe figure it out. But I think it would be good to catch you have an unconditional assignment, between the variable and the use case. I can see that being a P2. Maybe even a separate analyzer just that you have to turn on specially because of if there's a big cost in scanning backwards and finding was it an unconditional literal assignment.
Yeah.
So.
You mean the analyzer that says, this should be const?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that already exists, I believe.
Yeah, because if you have on this could be const and you hit this could be const, then the regex one will pop up next. And then of course the next iteration is, oh, well, I have two patterns and I just have a ternary that picks between them. Why can't this be smart enough to make two source generated regexes and switch between them? It's like, well, because at some point there's a reason you're getting paid to write code, assuming you're a professional, and if you're a hobbyist, then I'm sorry, we had to leave something for the professionals to do.
Yeah, I have no objections. I was just mostly asking about the general problem of false negatives in the context of us just trying to keep analysis reasonably cheap.
Yeah, to be honest, like we know it will have a cost to do the extra analysis. We don't know what that cost will be. So that's why we have that ongoing thread. That's why we're investigating. Once we know that number, it might just be a little bit of a wash off, and we might just go ahead and do the extra analysis as well to flag all cases. Or we might decide to, as Jeremy points out, to have like an additional analyzer that does the extra checking, but that's an opt-in thing or something.
I mean, I know from the platform compat stuff that flow analysis is extremely expensive. So like the way we have done it in the past is we basically just, retroactively say, oh, this method uses one of those APIs we care about. Now rerun it with flow analysis on, right? And so the bet here is that we only do this for a very tiny section of your code. If that ever happens to be a large number of methods, then, perf will tank tremendously, right? So that, and I think that kind of, I guess for regex, I'm inclined to believe that people will not use it in every method, right? But like the problem is, as soon as we do this for more and more analyzers, eventually, for regex we do this, for platform we do this, and eventually we reach half your method bodies when request flow analysis, right? And I think that's kind of why we kind of want to say, oh, we only use it for cases where we absolutely have to, rather than for cases where it would be nice to have. But it does have this problem of, okay, how do we track false negatives, right? Because that I don't know, right? I mean, we can usually we do it as by we ship an analyzer, we get feedback, but we tend to get more feedback on false positives than on false negatives, right? Especially when it's just, oh, you're just leaving perf on the table. It's like, well, how would I know, right? I mean, I run my code works fine. So unless every customer measures their performance critically, they would never know that there's a false negative, right? And that's kind of why I was asking what's our plan for that. But it's also reasonable to say, look, we don't care then. If our customers don't care about performance enough to measure, maybe it's not, you know, that bad that they miss out on this, right?
Good. Sounds good.
All right, so then I guess we approve this and move on.
Thank you.
And I think that's all we had time for today. At least we got 3 done.
I don't think you actually changed the label there, Emo.
No, I didn't know it. I changed my mind halfway through. All right, so then I see you guys back on Thursday.
You're welcome.